It happened on a night that felt impossibly ordinary. The streets were empty, the lamps flickering pale halos into the mist, and the wind carried that faint metallic chill that only comes after midnight. I had stayed too long at the cafe, just me, my thoughts, and the slow ticking of a wall clock that I could still hear echoing in my ears as I walked home. The route was familiar. I'd walked it countless times, 5 blocks past the bookstore, another 3 until the park, then the narrow lane leading up to my apartment. Nothing about that night seemed strange at first. The city felt asleep, still, almost peaceful. Halfway home, I stopped at an intersection. The air was so still I could hear the hum of the streetlight above me. I glanced at my phone. 12:03 a.m. The screen's glow looked wrong somehow, too pale, too flat. I slipped it back into my pocket and kept walking. When I reached my building, I looked up out of habit, expecting to see the faint orange haze of the city sky above the rooftops. But there was nothing. No stars, no clouds, just a darkness so complete it felt like staring into a void. I tried to shake it off, assuming the fog had thickened, and went inside. That night, I fell asleep easily. Too easily, in fact. When I woke the next morning, my room was dark. I thought it was still early, maybe before dawn, but when I reached for my phone, the screen said 10:14 a.m. I frowned and pulled back the curtains. Outside, there was no light. No sunrise. No sky. The world was dim, washed in endless gray. The streets were visible, but they looked muted, as though painted over with ash. I could still see shapes of buildings, trees, cars, but everything was wrapped in a dull, colorless twilight. The sun hadn't risen. I remember standing at the window for a long time, waiting for some hint of morning to break through. But none came. Hours passed, and the light never changed. It wasn't night, but it wasn't day either. The clocks worked, but the world outside seemed frozen in perpetual dusk. By noon, I went out, hoping to find someone, anyone, who could explain what was happening. But the streets were empty. The cafe where I had spent the night before was closed, chairs stacked on tables. The traffic lights blinked endlessly through cycles that no longer mattered. When I looked at the faces on the posters in the shop windows, I thought, for a moment, that their eyes had changed. The smiles looked strained, their gazes a little too sharp. But when I blinked, everything looked normal again, or as normal as it could be in a world where the sun no longer rose. I walked for hours. The city stretched on in its half-light, silent and unchanging. The air grew colder as I went, though no wind blew. Every sound I made, footsteps, breathing, the rustle of my jacket, seemed to echo back at me louder than before, as if the city were empty but listening. That evening, or what I assumed was evening, I sat on a park bench, exhausted. The lamps were still on, casting long shadows on the pavement, but they didn't seem to make any difference. The shadows had become darker, thicker, like stains spreading through the world. When I finally decided to go home, I passed by a shop window. The glass reflected the street behind me, the lamps glowing softly in the perpetual twilight. And there I was, walking, just as I should be. But when I stopped, my reflection didn't. It kept walking, its movements slow and deliberate, the faintest smile curving its lips as it drifted farther down the mirrored street. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. I turned around quickly, expecting to see someone else there, some trick of perspective, but the street was empty. Only when I turned back to the glass did I see the reflection again. It had stopped too, facing me now, though I hadn't moved. The smile was gone. It was just me again, or the shape of me, staring back with eyes that looked darker than they should have. That was 3 days ago. Or maybe 4. I can't tell anymore. The clocks keep ticking, but time doesn't feel real here. The sun still hasn't come back. The city hasn't changed. No birds, no voices, no dawn. Just the quiet hum of streetlights and the long shadows that never fade. Every morning, I open my curtains, hoping for even the faintest trace of sunlight, but all I see is that same gray horizon, stretching forever. Sometimes, when I pass by a window, I see movement in the reflection, a crowd gathering behind me, distant and indistinct, like figures forming from the fog. They don't move when I do. They just wait. I've stopped looking now. I keep the lights off, the curtains drawn. But even in the dark, I can feel the weight of it, the endless twilight pressing in on the world, on me. I walked home at midnight that night. And since then, the sun has never risen again. It happened on a stretch of road I've seen 1,000 times, a quiet corner where the city starts to thin out, where the streetlights buzz softly and the pavement always seems a little colder than the rest of the neighborhood. The bus stop sits right beside an old brick wall, its paint faded and peeling, with a metal bench that creaks even under the lightest weight. I've passed that stop nearly every day, on my way to work, on my way home, on evening walks when I needed to clear my head. It was always the same, lonely, quiet, a small stage set aside for people briefly passing through. But one night, everything felt different. It was late, almost too late to be out, and the sky was unusually dark, the kind of darkness that feels heavy, as though it's pressing down on the world. The wind had died down completely, leaving the air unnervingly still. I'd taken the long way home, trying to stretch the walk just a little longer, but as I approached the bus stop, I saw her. A woman, standing under the dim glow of the streetlight. She wasn't someone I recognized. Not someone I had seen waiting there before. That alone wasn't unusual, people use that stop all the time, after all, but something about her posture made me slow down. She stood perfectly still, her arms wrapped loosely around herself as though she were hugging a heavy coat closer, even though she wasn't wearing one. She watched the road as though expecting a bus at any second. But the street was empty. And it had been for a long time. As I got closer, I nodded to her out of habit, a small, polite gesture. She didn't acknowledge me. She didn't even blink. Her gaze stayed fixed on the road, eyes wide, not frightened, not anxious, just waiting. I continued walking, telling myself not to stare. But something tugged at the back of my mind. A sense of wrongness. A weight in the air. So I turned. She was still there, standing exactly as she had been. But now, the light seemed dimmer around her, as if her presence was swallowing it. The shadows beneath her feet looked oddly deep, like pools of ink clinging to the pavement. A strange thought crossed my mind then, one I can't explain even now. Had she always been there? Had I passed her before? Had she been waiting earlier that night? Yesterday? Last week? I tried to shake the thought off, blaming the late hour or my own tired brain. I told myself to keep walking. But something inside me whispered that I shouldn't leave her alone. So I took a few hesitant steps back toward the stop. "Are you okay?" I asked softly, feeling foolish as soon as the words left my mouth. She didn't answer. Didn't even shift her weight. But the wind picked up suddenly, just a small gust, and something strange happened. Her hair didn't move. It was loose around her shoulders, long and dark, the kind of hair that should have swayed easily in even the slightest breeze. But it didn't shift at all. Not one strand. I felt a mild chill crawl up the back of my neck. My feet wanted to turn me around, to walk away, but my curiosity kept me rooted. I tried again. "Do you need help?" Still nothing. Her breathing. I realized I couldn't hear it. Not even the faintest sound. She didn't seem tense or distressed, just impossibly still. The silence stretched between us, so thick it felt like a living thing. And when I looked a little closer, something else caught my eye. The bus schedule behind her, posted inside a little glass display, hadn't changed in years. I knew because I checked it every now and then. That route had been cancelled. Discontinued. No buses came to this street anymore. So who was she waiting for? As that thought sank in, the woman's head tilted, just slightly, and I felt my breath catch. She didn't turn to look at me, but her body shifted a fraction, like she had heard my realization. The shadows beneath her stretched farther across the ground, slipping toward where I stood like slow-moving fog. I stepped back without meaning to. Still, she didn't move. And yet, I felt watched. Not by her eyes, but by something else. The air around her seemed charged, humming with that sensation you get when someone stands too close behind you. I wanted to look away, but my gaze stayed locked on her unmoving form. Finally, I forced myself to leave. I turned and walked home, my steps quickening, my heartbeat echoing louder than my footfalls. I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous, that she was probably just waiting for someone to pick her up, or maybe she didn't know the route had been cancelled. But deep down, something didn't fit. Something felt wrong. The next morning, I passed the stop again. She was still there. Same posture. Same expression. Same stillness. The shadows beneath her had grown darker, deeper, as if she had settled into them overnight. Day after day, she remained. Always waiting. Always facing the same direction. Never leaving. Sometimes I'd walk different routes just to avoid passing her, but curiosity, or something else, always pulled me back eventually. No matter the time of day or night, she was there, waiting for a bus that would never come. And over days, then weeks, I noticed something even stranger. People walked right past her, but they didn't seem to see her at all. They didn't look at her, didn't shift to avoid her space, didn't acknowledge her presence in any way. Once, someone even walked through the edge of her shadow, and it clung to their leg for a moment before snapping back to her feet. And still, she waited. I don't know who she was. I don't know how long she's been there. I don't know what she's waiting for, or who. But sometimes, when the street is especially quiet and I pass by the stop, I swear her head turns just a little more. As if she's tracking me now. As if she's waiting for me to stop walking. To stand beside her. To wait with her. And I can't shake the feeling that the moment I do, I'll never leave either. It happened on a gray afternoon, the kind where the clouds hang low enough to feel heavy, like the sky is slowly sinking toward the buildings. I had spent the day running errands downtown, weaving through the usual rush of people, commuters, students, tourists with cameras pointed upward. The city felt alive, pulsing with its usual energy, but just beneath all of that, there was something else. A strange stillness I couldn't quite understand. I didn't notice the clock at first. Not until I passed the old plaza. The city clock tower stood in the heart of the square, tall and rusted with age, its face cracked at the edges. It had always been there, ticking away the rhythm of the city. People used it as a meeting point, a landmark, a reassurance that time was still marching on. But as I walked across the plaza, my eyes drifted toward it, and I froze. The clock hands weren't moving. Both were stuck at 4:17. I stared at the face for a long moment, expecting them to twitch, even a fraction. But they didn't. Nothing moved. Not the second hand. Not the shadow of the hands across the glass. It was utterly still. I frowned, glancing at my phone. 4:17, 4:17, 4:17, the numbers kept repeating in my mind, echoing inside me like something important, something wrong. And yet, everyone around me kept going. Shops were open, people were walking briskly, traffic flowed at its usual fevered pace. A couple argued near a fountain. A group of kids ran through puddles left from the morning rain. A man swept the front of his bakery, humming absently. No one seemed to notice the clock. No one even glanced at it. I told myself it was nothing, just a malfunction. But the longer I stood there, the more unsettled I felt. Something heavy pressed against me, like the air had shifted, thickened without warning. Even the sound of my own breathing felt too loud, too isolated. Finally, I walked on, convincing myself to forget about it. But I couldn't. Something about the way the world kept moving while time itself had stopped. It wrapped itself around my thoughts like a quiet whisper. I ducked into a small cafe to shake it off, but even inside, the atmosphere felt strange. Not wrong, exactly, just disconnected. The barista made my drink, steam swirling in lazy patterns. Customers chatted, laughed, scrolled through their phones. But the clock on the cafe wall, 4:17. I stared at it. And suddenly, I felt every tiny sound slip away. The clinking of cups. The hiss of steam. The murmur of voices. All of it muffled. Muted. Then I blinked. And everything snapped back into place. I stumbled out of the cafe, shaken. I checked my phone again, even though I already knew what I'd see. 4:17, at this point, I should have felt panic. But I didn't. And that scared me even more. It was like the whole city was wrapped in some kind of thick fog, not around our bodies, but around our minds. Keeping us calm. Keeping us moving. Keeping us from noticing the truth. As I continued down the street, I saw it again, the illusion of normal life. People crossing streets, checking watches, chatting with friends. But their movements felt off, like watching a video playing at the wrong speed. Slightly too smooth, too synchronized, too predictable. I approached a man standing at a crosswalk, his eyes fixed forward, waiting for the light. I felt compelled to speak. "Excuse me," I said softly. "Do you know what time it is?" He turned his head toward me. Slowly. Too slowly. His eyes met mine, but there was nothing behind them. No confusion, no recognition, no thought. Just a blank stare, as if he were waiting for a cue. Then, after a long moment, he blinked. 4:17, he replied calmly. I felt my skin crawl. He hadn't checked a watch. Hadn't looked away. He just answered. And when he turned back toward the crosswalk, I saw his reflection in the shop window beside us. He wasn't blinking. Not at all. His reflection stood perfectly still, frozen in the glass, but the real man beside me continued breathing, shifting his weight slightly, adjusting the strap of his bag. The reflection didn't mimic any of it. I stumbled backward, my pulse pounding in my ears. The world around me seemed to shimmer, the line between what I saw and what I felt growing thinner, like a veil beginning to tear. I ran. Down the sidewalk, past storefronts with clocks stuck at the same minute, past people who didn't seem quite real, past the places I had walked 1,000 times before but now felt unfamiliar. By the time I reached my apartment building, I was trembling. I pushed through the lobby door and climbed the stairs instead of taking the elevator, desperate for the grounding feeling of something, anything, normal. Inside my apartment, the silence was suffocating. I locked the door behind me and flicked on the light. For a moment, I felt safe. Then I saw the clock on my wall. 4:17, I grabbed it, ripped out the battery, threw it across the room. It hit the floor with a sharp, hollow click. And the hands moved. Both of them, slowly, dragged themselves back to 4:17 even without power, the sound of the metal scraping inside the plastic case echoing through the room. That night, I barely slept. I could hear faint shuffling outside my door, footsteps that paused just long enough to make me certain they weren't accidental. When I finally drifted off in the early hours, it was only because exhaustion won out over fear. When I awoke the next morning, I rushed to my window, heart pounding, desperate for some sign that the world had returned to normal. The street was full. Cars passed. People talked. Shops opened. Everything moved. But above the city, the clock tower sat motionless. 4:17, still frozen. Still watching. And everyone kept moving, acting out their lives, lives that didn't seem entirely their own anymore. And sometimes, when I look closely, I see their reflections drifting behind them slightly out of sync. Like something underneath their skin is waiting. Learning. Practicing the motions of living. I don't know what happened that day. I don't know why time stopped. I don't know why the world didn't. But I know this, when the city clock stopped, the people didn't. And I'm no longer sure they ever will. It was late, past midnight, when I finally stepped outside for some air. The night had been restless, the kind where sleep doesn't quite come but exhaustion still weighs heavily on your shoulders. My room felt stifling, the air too thick, too unmoving, and I found myself drawn out onto the balcony without really knowing why. The city below was unusually quiet. No cars passed on the street. No voices rose from the sidewalks. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I leaned against the railing and tilted my head back, hoping the night sky would calm me. But the moment I looked up, everything inside me froze. The moon, full and bright in the sky, was facing the wrong way. I don't mean it looked strange or distorted. I don't mean it was tilted at an odd angle. I mean the moon was turned, rotated in a direction I had never seen before, showing a face I didn't recognize. The patterns weren't right. The craters weren't right. It looked reversed, somehow. Like someone had taken the moon I'd known all my life and spun it slightly off its axis, revealing a side that wasn't meant to be seen from Earth. At first, I thought my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. I blinked, rubbed my face, tried adjusting my position. But no matter how I moved, the moon remained wrong, its familiar features rearranged, its shadows cast in angles that made no sense. Even its glow felt unfamiliar, tinged with a soft bluish-white that made the night feel colder than before. A strange, creeping unease settled into my chest. I told myself it was an illusion, fog, clouds, my own exhaustion, but the air was clear, the sky perfectly still. And the moon was watching. It took me a moment to notice that something else was off. The light the moon cast didn't fall the way moonlight normally does. It didn't spread out gently across rooftops or shimmer on glass. Instead, it seemed to pull toward things, stretching in narrow beams that traveled down buildings like long fingers, reaching toward the ground. One of those beams stretched toward me. I stepped back instinctively, my breath hitching, but the beam didn't shift. It just hovered a few feet away, like a thin spotlight waiting for me to step into it. I told myself to go inside, to shut the balcony door and forget what I'd seen, but I couldn't seem to move. I was rooted in place, unable to tear my eyes from the wrong-way moon. Then, the city changed. It was subtle at first, a faint dimming of the streetlights, a soft ripple of shadow along the pavement, but within seconds, everything below me seemed to darken. Not like a power outage. Not like lights flickering off. More like the darkness itself was rising. The shadows on the ground lengthened, stretching across the pavement in unnatural directions, flowing toward each other until they merged into one wide, creeping pool. It was slow, but purposeful, like ink spreading across paper. And all the while, the moon shone down with that pale, bluish glow, its face turned toward me in a way that made my skin crawl. I glanced toward the building across from mine, and that's when I saw them. People, standing on their balconies, just like me. Dozens of them. All looking up at the moon. None of them moving. None of them blinking. Just staring. Their faces were washed in the same cold light, their expressions blank and distant. And in the bluish moonlight, their eyes looked almost reflective, like polished glass. A chill ran through me. I whispered, "Hello," even though I knew none of them would respond. They didn't. But something else did. The moon shifted. Not slowly, not subtly, it turned. The surface rotated slightly, as though it had been waiting for me to speak. And in that moment, I saw something impossible. A shadow moved across the face of the moon. Not a cloud. Not an eclipse. Something with shape, like a figure passing behind a screen. It stretched long and thin, then vanished. The silence deepened. I stumbled backward, bumping into the balcony door. My heart was pounding now, loud enough that it drowned out everything else. I reached for the handle, ready to flee inside, when I felt the air shift behind me. A soft breeze, cold and deliberate, brushed the back of my neck. I froze. Slowly, trembling, I turned. The balcony door had cracked open on its own. Just a sliver. Just enough to see my reflection in the glass. But my reflection wasn't right. The expression was wrong, its lips parted slightly, its eyes wide with something like anticipation. And as I watched in horror, the reflection slowly lifted its face upward, toward the moon. I hadn't moved. But it had. My legs went weak. I yanked the door open and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me. The room was dark except for the faint glow of moonlight spilling across the floor. I reached for the curtains with shaking hands, pulling them closed, but just before they shut completely, I saw one last thing. Reflected faintly in the glass of the closed window, behind my reflection, behind me, were the people from the balconies. All of them. Standing inside my room. Silent. Still. Watching. I whipped around wildly, but the room was empty. When I looked back at the window, the reflections were gone. Only the faint, cold glow of the wrong-way moon remained. That was 3 nights ago. Since then, I haven't slept. Not really. The moon still faces that way, every night, turned slightly, like it's angling itself toward me. Toward us. And ever so faintly, when the city is quiet and the shadows grow deep, I hear something drifting down from the sky. A low, distant whisper. Calling my name. Every night, a little louder. And I'm terrified of what will happen when I finally understand what it's saying. It happened on a morning that never felt like a morning at all. I remember waking up to the soft, gray light leaking through my curtains, the kind of dim glow you get just before dawn, when the world hasn't quite committed to becoming day yet. I lay in bed for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of my apartment. The radiator clicked intermittently, the old pipes groaning softly, and for a few minutes, everything felt ordinary. But something was off. I couldn't name it. It wasn't the room, which looked the same as always, or the cold wooden floor, or the faint smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen where I'd forgotten to wash last night's mug. It was something deeper, a strange heaviness in the air, like the world itself was holding still. When I checked my phone, the first thing I noticed was the date. Yesterday's date. I frowned, assuming it hadn't updated. I turned it off, on again. Same date. I checked my wall calendar, where I had crossed off days obsessively, only to find the same square still empty, unmarked. I could have sworn I crossed it off last night. Sleep inertia, I told myself. Just a small mix-up. But as I went about my morning routine, coffee, window, silence, I noticed something else. The street outside was exactly the same as I remembered from the day before. Same parked cars. Same trash can left half-tipped from the wind. Same neighbor walking her dog in the same yellow coat, following the exact same path. The same birds perched on the same wire. All of them, frozen in yesterday's script. I felt the first ripple of unease then, a soft tremor beneath my ribs. Still, I tried to shrug it off. Maybe I had just forgotten things. Maybe the days had blended together. Exhaustion can do strange things, erase boundaries, blur time. That thought comforted me until I left the apartment. I was locking my door when I heard the whisper. Soft. Barely there. Like breath slipping through a crack. Asterisk, it's still yesterday. I froze. The hallway behind me was empty, dimly lit by the single flickering bulb overhead. My first thought was that it was a neighbor. Someone playing a joke. But the voice, it wasn't a voice spoken aloud. It came from near my ear, but it didn't touch the air. It didn't vibrate. It was like a thought someone else had pushed into my mind. I swallowed hard, my hands shaking slightly as I stepped back from the door. The silence in the hallway felt thick and watchful. Then I heard it again, faint, almost tender. Asterisk, it's still yesterday. Asterisk, I turned sharply, expecting someone behind me. No one. Just the quiet hum of the building. I hurried down the stairs, desperate for noise, for people, for proof that something was real. But the moment I stepped outside, my stomach dropped. Because she was there. Standing on the sidewalk directly across the street. A woman I had never seen before. Dressed in clothes that felt out of place, something vintage, something soft and faded. She stood perfectly still, her face half shadowed by the morning light, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She looked at me like she'd been waiting. And when our eyes met, she smiled. The same whisper curled into my ear, only now, I could see her lips move. Asterisk, it's still yesterday. Asterisk, my breath hitched. The world seemed to tilt, just slightly. The shadows around her felt too long, too heavy for morning. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She lifted her hand slowly, pointing upward. I followed her gesture. And everything inside me went cold. The sky, what should have been the waning gray of early morning, was the exact same sky I'd seen the day before. Same cloud patterns. Same drifting shape that looked like a bent feather. Same faint, unnatural shimmer at the edge of the sun that I'd noticed out of annoyance yesterday. The weather hadn't changed. The clouds hadn't shifted. Time hadn't moved. I backed away from her, my heart pounding in my chest. She watched me with gentle, patient eyes. You know it's true, she whispered, not aloud, but inside my thoughts again. You felt it the moment you woke. I turned and walked quickly down the street, refusing to look back, refusing to acknowledge the way the world seemed to echo yesterday's footsteps. Every corner I turned brought me to scenes I recognized, conversations happening exactly as they had before, sounds repeating themselves like a looping film. Every clock I saw read the same time as yesterday morning. And the people. Their movements felt too familiar. Too practiced. Too identical to the day before. By midday, the truth had settled into my bones like ice. I wasn't repeating the day. The day had never ended. Evening came. Then night. Then the early gray light returned, unchanged, colorless, identical. It was still yesterday. It had always been yesterday. And she was always there, across the street, watching, whispering the same phrase with soft certainty whenever I dared to look her way. Asterisk, it's still yesterday. Asterisk, and the more the days failed to move, the more I began to wonder, fearfully, if she wasn't warning me, but welcoming me. Inviting me to accept a truth I could no longer escape. Tomorrow wasn't coming. Not for me. Not for this city. Not for the sky that refused to turn. And somewhere behind that whispering voice, behind her gentle smile, behind the stillness that wrapped the world in an endless loop, something else was waiting. Something that only existed in yesterday. It started as a small oddity, nothing more than a slight discomfort, like noticing your shirt feels tighter than usual or realizing a familiar tune suddenly sounds out of key. I first saw it through my bedroom window, in the hazy light of early dawn. The sky was beginning to lighten with that soft silver blue that usually pulls the world gently out of sleep. Birds were faintly chirping. Traffic murmured awake in the distance. Yet along my street, every single streetlight was still on. Not flickering. Not dimming. Not powering down in that slow, staggered pattern I was used to. Just glowing, bright, warm circles of artificial orange spilling across the sidewalk and casting long shadows across cars and houses. It looked wrong. Like the night hadn't quite let go, clinging desperately to the one last thing it could control. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I'd woken too early. But my phone said 7:12 a.m., late enough that the street should have been properly lit by sunlight, not by lamps that had no business still burning. I stood there for a moment, staring at the glow, trying to find a logical explanation. A power issue. A sensor glitch. Something simple. But deep down, in that quiet place inside myself where the mind whispers uncomfortable truths, I felt the first tug of unease. Morning had come. But the light outside didn't believe it. On my walk to work, I expected the lights to shut off eventually. They always do. It's as automatic as breathing for a city like mine. But block after block, every lamp post remained stubbornly awake, humming faintly as though each carried a hidden pulse. Oddly enough, no one else seemed to notice. People hurried along the sidewalk, eyes on their phones or the ground, moving in that habitual morning rhythm. Joggers passed by, sweat already dampening their shirts. A kid waited for the school bus, headphones in, kicking at a rock. And the streetlights blazed on, ignored, as though invisible. The strange part wasn't that they stayed on. It was that their glow looked wrong under the daylight, like two realities overlapping, competing. The morning sun was soft and cool, the lamps were harsh and warm. It made every surface, brick, tree bark, parked cars, look double exposed, as if the world wasn't sure which of its own faces to show. At one point, I passed under a cluster of lights and felt the warmth of their glow on my skin. Morning light didn't usually feel hot. But this was thick, almost humid, like stepping too close to a fireplace. That's when I glanced up. The lamps weren't just lit. They were brighter than usual. Not glaring. Not blinding. Just intense. Focused. Watching. I quickened my pace, forcing myself not to look again. The day unfolded uneventfully once I reached the office, though something small and persistent gnawed at me, like a thread pulled too tightly in the fabric of my thoughts. At lunch, I looked out the window again. Every streetlight in the city remained lit. The sun was high by then, sharp and direct, but the lamps continued to burn, unchanged, unflickering, their halos visible even in the midday glare. I could make out the faint hum from the poles nearest the building, a low droning vibration that rattled somewhere behind my ribs. I didn't eat much after that. By evening, the sky had begun to turn orange and purple, clouds stretched thin across the horizon. I walked home slowly, hoping, needing, to see at least one streetlight finally give in and turn off. But as dusk melted into true night, the lamps didn't flicker or shift. They didn't react to the darkness at all. It felt as though they weren't lighting the night anymore, they were lighting themselves. Self-contained. Self-directed. Independent. And then it happened. Halfway down my block, something inside me told me to stop walking. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe. Or fear. Or some vague animal sense of danger whispering that something wasn't right. I stopped beneath a streetlight, one I must have walked under 1,000 times. The lamp buzzed softly above me, casting that deep amber glow that had seemed so strange all day. When I looked up, I expected to see the familiar glass dome. Instead, I saw an eye. Not literally, not a biological eye, but the light itself had shaped into something unmistakably aware. The glow focused, tightening into a single bright point like a pupil contracting. It was looking at me. The warmth on my skin intensified. I stumbled backward, heart pounding, but the glow followed me, stretching, narrowing, tracking me with clinical precision. Every lamp on the block flickered subtly, one after another, like a row of living creatures lifting their heads in unison. No one else was on the street. No cars passed. No noise except the hum, growing louder now, vibrating through the pavement. I forced myself to move. I ran the last 2 blocks to my house, slammed the door, locked every bolt, and slid down against the wall, trembling as the humming outside slowly faded into silence. When I finally worked up the nerve to peek through the blinds, the lamps were still glowing, unchanged, unwavering, watching the empty street. Waiting. That was 3 nights ago. Since then, every morning has arrived the same way. The sky brightens. The sun rises. But the streetlights never shut off. People still ignore them. Dogs still walk beneath them. Cars still pass under their halos. But I notice something now, something I hadn't seen before. Every day, the lights are a little brighter. A little warmer. A little more focused. They follow movement. Not obviously. Not blatantly. Just subtly enough that if you weren't looking, you wouldn't see it. But I see it. And the worst part? Last night, as I lay in bed, trying to convince myself the glow slipping under my curtains was just in my imagination. One of the streetlights outside my window flickered, not randomly, not glitching. It flickered twice. Then paused. Then flickered twice again. Like a signal. Or a message. And as the glow pulsed against my bedroom wall, I felt something inside me whisper, quiet, certain, undeniable, they've been on for too long. They're waking up. It happened on a night when I was more tired than I'd been in weeks. The kind of exhaustion that settles behind your eyes, that makes your thoughts feel soft around the edges. I remember brushing my teeth slowly, moving through my apartment like someone drifting underwater. The world felt blurred, distant, muffled. Even the soft hum of the refrigerator sounded far away, like it belonged to another room, or another life entirely. By the time I climbed into bed, I was half asleep already. I pulled the blanket up, felt the familiar weight settle over me, and let my eyes close. My breathing deepened. My muscles relaxed. The last thing I remember thinking was how good it felt to finally let go. Then I slept. Or at least, I thought I did. Because the next thing I remember is opening my eyes again. And I was exactly where I had been a moment before. Same position. Same breath held halfway in. Same blanket, still settling as though I'd just laid down. The room hadn't shifted. My body hadn't changed position. Nothing had moved. I blinked, confused. Had I really fallen asleep? Had I only thought I did? It felt like time had passed, like my mind had dipped into that warm, weightless place just before dreaming. But the clock on my bedside table showed the exact same minute, the exact same second, as when I closed my eyes. It hadn't moved at all. Not by a single tick. At first, I told myself the clock was broken. Glitching. Battery dead. But my phone, on the nightstand, read the same time. And so did the microwave in the kitchen when I got up, uneasy, and walked over to check. Everything in my apartment said the same thing, time hadn't passed. But I had felt something. That drifting sensation, that soft letting go, that heaviness behind my eyelids, that was real. I knew it was. I had fallen into sleep. I was certain of it. So why wasn't I anywhere else? Why hadn't time moved? I tried to shake it off. Maybe I'd just slipped into a micro-dream. A flicker of sleep so brief it fooled my mind. Science had explanations for things like that: sleep paralysis, false awakenings, fragmented dreams. I tried to believe that. I climbed back into bed. Closed my eyes again. Let myself sink. This time, I felt myself drifting more deeply, my limbs floating, my thoughts turning soft and warm, the world dissolving around me. I knew I was falling asleep. I knew it. And then, I opened my eyes again. Same moment. Same second. Same inhaled breath. Same blanket still rising from where I had tugged it. A wave of dizziness washed over me. A sickening, impossible feeling of asterisk repetition. The clock beside me flickered. Just once. A tiny pulse of light. Then it settled, still frozen at the same time. I sat up slowly, feeling the air grow colder around me. My apartment was silent, but not a normal silence. It felt held. Like the air itself wasn't moving. Like even sound had stopped. I clapped my hands once, loudly, testing the space. There was no echo. None. It was like the world had been muted. My breath grew faster. I tried to ground myself, to make sense of what was happening. I reached for my phone. It flickered too, its screen washing white for a moment before returning, with the same frozen minute. I walked to the window. The street outside was still. Not quiet. Not calm. Still. The trees were frozen mid-sway. A car in the distance hung motionless, like a toy placed on the street. Even the long tail of a passing cat was suspended mid-step, mid-swing. Time had not just stopped. I had stepped out of it. I stumbled backward from the window, my pulse thunderous in my ears, though even my heartbeat sounded wrong, too slow, too quiet, like it was fighting the silence around me. I ran back to the bed, desperate to try again, to break whatever loop I had fallen into. I lay down, forced my eyes shut, forced my breathing to steady. I waited for the drift. Waited for sleep to take me. And when it did, I woke up again. Same moment. Same frozen second. Same breath caught in my chest. A soft sound filled the room then, so faint I almost missed it. A whisper. Not from the hallway. Not from the window. From right beside me. You didn't leave, it murmured, as though amused. You only thought you did. My body locked up, every muscle freezing in place. Slowly, against every instinct screaming inside me, I turned my head toward the voice. And there, lying beside me in the bed, sharing the same pillow, was, me. Or rather, my sleeping face. Eyes closed. Breathing steady. Perfectly still. I looked at myself, at the version of me that should have been conscious, awake, and yet, wasn't. It was as if my body had stayed behind, continuing the moment I left, while something else, the part of me that woke slipped loose. My reflection, my other self, didn't open its eyes. Didn't react. But the whisper came again, from somewhere inside my thoughts, soft and certain, you can't wake up twice. Not unless something wakes up in your place. The frozen world around me felt suddenly thinner, like a fragile shell that could crack with a single movement. And when I looked at the clock again, the second hand twitched, for the first time since everything began. Not forward. But backward. One slow, deliberate tick. Now, every time I blink, I feel the world shift slightly out of rhythm, like I'm slipping further from the moment I was supposed to wake up. I don't know how many more times I can wake into the same second before something else takes my place entirely. And the worst part? I think my sleeping body beside me is starting to dream. And whatever it's dreaming of me. It happened on a cool, late afternoon, the kind of hour when the entire city feels like it's inhaling before evening settles in. The light had that soft golden tint, the long shadows stretching across the buildings, painting everything warm and gentle. It should have been an ordinary walk home for me. And it was, until it wasn't. I first saw her standing at the corner near the bakery, where the street opens wide into a busy intersection. That road is always alive with movement, cars weaving, horns blaring, bikes flying past, buses exhaling clouds of exhaust. There's a rhythm to it, a constant, noisy flow. Everyone in the neighborhood knows you don't cross there unless the light tells you to. But she didn't wait for the light. She stepped into the road just as the traffic surged forward. I stopped mid-step, breath catching in my throat. It was an instinctive reaction, the kind you have when you expect something terrible to happen. But the instant her foot touched the asphalt, something impossible happened. All the traffic froze. Not slowed. Not braked. Froze. A car that had been rushing through the intersection, the driver still gripping the wheel, his expression a mix of boredom and irritation, had stopped mid-motion. Not even the faintest tire skid. No noise. No warning. A bicycle hung in the air like a photograph. A bus, mid-turn, stood perfectly still as though someone had paused reality. Even the exhaust from the vehicles hung in the air, unmoving, like smudged paint strokes in a frozen masterpiece. But she kept walking. Her pace was steady, unbothered, like she wasn't aware that the world around her had suddenly stilled. The light breeze tugging at her coat didn't reach anyone else. Her hair moved softly with the wind, while the scarves of pedestrians nearby hung heavy and motionless, their owners caught mid-step. I watched her cross the road, my heart pounding as though trying to break free. Something about her was quiet. Too quiet. She didn't look around, didn't check the cars, didn't seem to notice the halted world she moved through. She walked as if she'd done this 1,000 times, as if she knew what would happen. I found myself whispering her movements under my breath, like narrating something that wasn't quite real. Left foot, right foot, step, step. She reached the central divider. She kept going. And the entire time, nothing around her moved. Not a single engine rumbled. Not a single pedestrian blinked. Not even a bird overhead flapped its wings. Everything, every living thing, had stopped. Except me. Except her. When she reached the other side of the road, she paused. As if sensing, for the first time, that she was being watched. She turned her head slowly, and even that slight shift of motion made the frozen world feel wrong, like something in it strained against its own stillness. Our eyes met. And in that moment, everything in me tightened, my breath, my muscles, my thoughts. I don't know why. She wasn't scary. She didn't look threatening. Her face was calm, her expression neutral, her movements delicate. But her eyes. There was something in them. Something that didn't belong to this place, or this time, or maybe even this world. She lifted her hand, just a little, almost as if she were about to wave. But before she completed the gesture, something shifted at the edges of the scene. The traffic moved. Not gradually. Not like reality easing back into motion. But suddenly, sharply, like a glitch snapping into place. Engines roared. Tires screeched. A horn blared. The bus shuddered forward. The bike crashed onto the pavement, its rider jolted into motion too late to keep balance. All at once, motion returned everywhere, except to her. She remained still, her hand still half raised, her eyes locked on mine. But no one around us seemed to notice. Not the biker picking himself up, not the driver muttering angrily, not the pedestrians resuming their hurried steps. It was like they had no memory of freezing. Like they'd skipped over the moment entirely. Only I remembered. And she did too. She lowered her hand slowly, purposefully. Then she turned around and continued down the street as if nothing had happened. And yet, as I watched her go, the strangest realization settled over me like a shiver: she didn't walk with traffic. Or against it. Her steps didn't match the rhythm of the world. They didn't sync with footsteps or passing cars or turning lights. She moved in her own time. A time the rest of us didn't belong to. Every time I blinked, she was a little farther away, farther than someone walking should have been able to get. One blink, 10 steps. Another blink, halfway down the block. Then she disappeared behind a building. I stood there for a long time, unable to move, afraid that if I stepped into the road, the world might freeze again, or worse, might not let me move when she did. Since that day, the city feels different. Every intersection feels like a potential fracture. Every moment of stillness feels like something waiting to break. And sometimes, late at night, when the streets are quiet and the traffic lights flicker, I catch a glimpse of her reflection in the windows of passing cars. Not walking. Just standing. Watching the road. Watching me. As if waiting for the world to freeze again. It began on a night that already felt slightly off, long before anything truly strange happened. One of those nights where the air tastes heavy, where the shadows seem to stretch farther than they should, where you keep checking the clock because something in the back of your mind insists it's later than it is, even when it isn't. I remember lying in bed, staring at my ceiling, listening to the distant hum of the city. Normally the noise would fade as it grew late, replaced by quieter tones, an occasional car, the soft rumble of a late-night bus, footsteps echoing down the street. But that night, the sounds remained constant. Not louder. Not quieter. Just, steady. Unchanging. I checked my phone. 2:17 a.m. It felt like I'd been awake for years. I rolled over, trying to sleep, but the room seemed subtly brighter than it should have been. Not daylight, just this faint, low glow that seeped in from the blinds, like the city lights had become too bright, too intrusive. I closed my eyes, drifted for a moment, and then, I opened them again. Same faint glow. Same humming city. No darkness deepened. No hour passed. My phone still read 2:17. That was the moment unease settled into my bones. I got up, walked to the window, and peered out at the street below. The city looked awake. Too awake. Every apartment window seemed to glow with artificial light. Not a single room was dark, not even in the buildings where half the floors were usually empty this time of night. Cars moved slowly but continuously, circling the same blocks like they were trapped in an endless loop. Streetlights flickered not with the usual rhythm, but in a slow, deliberate pulse. Like breathing. Across the street, a man stood at his balcony railing, staring straight ahead. He didn't blink. Didn't shift. His light was on behind him, casting a long shadow across the balcony tile, but nothing moved. Not the curtains. Not the air. Not even his chest. I whispered, "Are you okay?" knowing he couldn't hear me. He didn't react. The city, lit up, bustling in its quiet, mechanical way, felt entirely disconnected from time. I checked my phone again. 2:17, I went to the kitchen. Turned on the light. Drank a glass of water. Phone, 2:17. I sat on the couch, eyes wide, breathing shallow. 2:17, it wasn't until the third time I circled back to my bedroom that I felt something shift, not in time, but in me. A subtle heaviness in the air. A pressure under the skin. Like the atmosphere had thickened, like the walls were pushing inward. The light outside my window dimmed, just barely, but the darkness didn't deepen. It simply compressed, folding over itself in a strange, muted way. A thought whispered through me, unbidden, *, the night doesn't want to end. *, I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside. The moment I opened the building door, I felt it, the cold heaviness of the night pressing down like a physical weight. The street should have been empty at that hour, yet people walked by, slow and distant, like sleepwalkers caught in a repeating dream. Their faces were pale under the streetlights, their eyes unfocused. No one spoke. No one looked at anyone else. No one stopped. The city was awake. But no one in it was. I approached a woman standing near the bus stop. She wore pajamas, thin ones, like she'd left her apartment without realizing it. Her hair hung loose, unmoving in the still air. She stared straight down the road. "Excuse me," I said softly, stepping closer. No reaction. Her pupils didn't even adjust to my shadow. The lights beside her pulsed, bright, dim, like a slow heartbeat. I followed her gaze. Down the road, I saw the skyline. Every building was lit. Every window was glowing. The whole city was illuminated like a festival, but the light felt wrong. Too cold. Too consistent. Too eternal. I whispered into the frozen air, "When does morning come?" A voice answered behind me. "It doesn't." I turned sharply, heart leaping into my throat. A child stood there, a girl of maybe 7 or 8, barefoot on the pavement, wearing a thin nightgown. Her hair fell over her shoulders in tangled waves, and her eyes, they were dark, deep, almost bottomless, like they held the entire night inside them. "It doesn't come anymore," she said softly. "The city refused." I stared at her. My tongue felt thick in my mouth. "What do you mean? Where are your parents?" She didn't respond to that. Instead, she stepped closer and tilted her head upward as if listening to something far above us. "Do you hear it?" she whispered. I strained my ears. At first, nothing. Then, very faintly, a low hum. Not electrical. Not mechanical. Something deeper. Something that seemed to vibrate through the pavement. Through the buildings. Through me. The girl blinked slowly. "It's trying to stay awake forever." Before I could ask more, the streetlights around us flared, bright as morning for a single heartbeat, then settled back into their pulsing glow. The girl took a step backward. "Go home," she whispered. "Before it notices you." My skin crawled. Before what notices me? But before I could speak, the girl turned and walked away, straight toward a building that didn't exist before I blinked. And then she was gone. Just gone. I stumbled back to my building, heart racing, trying not to look at the windows full of unmoving people, at the endless twilight, at the sky that refused to lighten. Once inside, I locked every door, every window, turned off every light. I checked the time one last time. 2:17, still. And as I crawled into bed, blankets trembling slightly around me, I realized something: the night wasn't long. It was endless. And somewhere out there, in the humming heart of the sleepless city, something was glad I finally understood that. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind that feels suspended between one week and the next. Soft sunlight through the window, the distant hum of traffic, the faint ticking of my wall clock blending into the stillness. I remember thinking how peaceful everything felt. How normal. It was the last moment of normalcy I would ever recognize. I had just put a pot of coffee on when I glanced at the microwave clock. 1994. Not the time. Not even a time-like format. Just the year, 1994, blinking in bright green. I frowned, assuming the power had gone out and reset everything. The microwave was old, it glitched sometimes. I opened and closed its door. Still 1994. Weird, I thought. Maybe it was stuck on a date mode or something. Then I looked at the oven clock. 2087. Just the year. No hour. No minute. No blinking colon. My stomach tightened. I walked over to the living room, where the wall clock hung, a simple, round thing with black hands and white face. I expected it to be wrong too, maybe spinning backward or stopped entirely. But instead of numbers, instead of hands, there was a glowing digital readout sitting in the center of the clock face, as if the analog world had been overwritten. 1732. My breath caught. A different year. I reached for my phone next, because surely that would be normal. Surely my phone wasn't part of whatever glitch was sweeping my kitchen. But when I woke the screen, it wasn't the home screen. It was a date. 12/09/12, 9:99. I dropped the phone. It hit the carpet with a soft thud. My heart hammered in my chest, the rhythm uneven and sharp. I told myself to calm down, to breathe, to be rational. This had to be a software bug. A malfunction. A power surge. Something explainable. But then I looked up. My TV screen, black, powered off, showed a faint reflection of the room. Except the reflection didn't match. The numbers floating on its surface were different too, 30, 21, 5, 81, 40, 44. They flickered like distant stars, rearranging themselves, shifting in and out of focus. I stepped backward, my legs trembling slightly. Every reflective surface in my apartment, my glass coffee table, the framed picture on the wall, even the stainless steel sink in the kitchen, displayed different years. None matched. None made sense. My apartment looked like a museum of collapsing timelines. I whispered, "What is happening?" even though no one was there to answer. That was when the ticking started. Not from the wall clock, it had gone completely silent. Not from the oven or microwave or any machine. It came from asterisk everywhere. Asterisk, a layered ticking sound, dozens of overlapping rhythms, each slightly off from the other. Fast. Slow. Erratic. Soft. Loud. Like every clock in the world was ticking over each other inside the walls, inside the air, inside my own head. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the ticking didn't stop. It vibrated through the floorboards, through the bones of my skull. And then, just as abruptly as it began, it stopped. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. I looked around slowly, afraid of what I might see next. One by one, the clocks began updating themselves. The microwave blinked to 21:45, the oven changed to 0013, the wall clock faded, replaced by 14:55. My phone, still on the carpet, buzzed once, screen lighting up with year 0000. I didn't even know a year 0 existed. My throat tightened. A sense of dread coiled deep in my chest. It felt like the world had slipped, like I was standing between layers of time that weren't supposed to overlap. Then the lights flickered. Only for a second. But in that second, every screen, every reflective surface, every device, showed the same thing, a countdown. Not a year. Not a date. Not even a time. Just a number ticking down fast. 10, 9, 8. I stumbled backward, breath shallow, mind racing. 7, 6, 5. My vision blurred. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear anything else. For 3, I shut my eyes. 2, and the countdown stopped. Silence again. Slowly, terrified, I opened my eyes. All clocks were off. All screens were black. All reflections showed only my own pale, shaking face. I thought, for a moment, that whatever had happened was over. Until I noticed something. My reflection wasn't breathing at the same rhythm I was. As I inhaled, it hesitated. As I exhaled, it delayed. Then, very slowly, it lifted a hand. My real hand stayed frozen at my side. But in every reflective surface around the room, every clock, every window, every shiny object, my reflection pointed toward a blank wall. A wall with no clocks, no screens, no mirrors. And in a whisper that sounded like it came from centuries away, overlapping itself in thousands of tones, it said, "Your year hasn't been decided yet. I haven't checked the time since." It happened on one of those late afternoons where everything feels a little too still, a little too quiet, where the air hangs heavy in the room and even the dust motes drifting through the light seem to move more slowly than they should. I remember sitting on the couch, half distracted, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the muffled sounds of the city outside. It was an ordinary day. Quiet. Forgettable. And then she stood up. She walked toward the window with the slow, gentle movement of someone stretching their limbs after hours of stillness. I didn't think anything of it at first. She often paused at the window to watch the evening unfold, the soft colors shifting, the warmth of the sun slipping behind the buildings. A habit. A ritual. But the moment she placed her hand on the glass, I saw her shoulders tense. "Are you okay?" I asked, but she didn't answer. She leaned forward slightly, her breath fogging the lower corner of the pane. I watched the way her hand tightened on the window frame, a small tremor running through her fingers. "Look," she whispered. It wasn't fear in her voice. It wasn't confusion. It was something heavier, something that made my stomach twist. I walked over slowly, unsure of what I was about to see. Outside, the sky glowed with a warm orange hue, painted across the tops of the buildings like a soft watercolor. The sun hovered just above the horizon, half submerged, its last sliver of light stretching across the rooftops. A sunset. A perfectly normal sunset. Except we had just watched the sun set an hour before. My voice caught in my throat. "No, that's not possible." But she didn't turn. Didn't blink. Didn't even breathe for a moment. She only stared, wide-eyed, as the sun dipped lower, slowly disappearing behind the skyline, again. The shadows lengthened across the street below, stretching out like dark fingers reaching toward the window. The sky shifted from orange to purple, the colors melting into the familiar gradient of dusk. Dusk we had already lived. I felt a coldness bloom in my chest. "What time is it?" I checked the clock on the wall. 6:51 p.m. Again. The exact same minute the last sunset had ended. I grabbed my phone. 6:51 p.m. Battery full. Signal strong. Seconds unmoving. "Maybe it's a glitch," I muttered, my voice shaking. "A power outage, or..." But then the sky brightened. Just a little. Like someone adjusting a dimmer. She gasped, stepping back from the window, her hand flying up to her mouth. The sun that had just fully disappeared, was rising again. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just as slowly and steadily as a normal sunrise. I felt my legs weaken beneath me. I couldn't understand what I was seeing. It wasn't a rewind. It wasn't a loop. It wasn't a trick of light. It was the sun rising into a twilight sky. "It's going backward," she whispered. And she was right. The sun lifted above the horizon until it hovered halfway up the sky, suspended in a strange, muted glow that matched no time of day I'd ever seen. The light outside felt wrong, bright and dim at the same time, casting shadows that stretched in unnatural angles across the buildings. It wasn't evening anymore. And it wasn't morning. It was something in between. The world held its breath. Then, the sun began to set once more. "Make it stop," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Make it stop." But what could I do? The apartment felt smaller, the walls tighter, as if the shifting sun was pulling time itself apart around us. My hands shook as I checked every clock I could find. 6:51 p.m. 6:51 p.m. 6:51 p.m. The second hand didn't move. Not even once. The world outside darkened again. Streetlights flickered on. The last light drained from the sky, and then came the soft, unmistakable glow of the sun rising again. The third time. Now it emerged faster, as if catching up. Too fast. Too bright. The shadows shivered along the pavement like living threads. The buildings glowed unnaturally, as if reflecting light from somewhere they shouldn't. The sky turned a strange shade, too red, too gold, too intense. And then we saw them. Shapes. Silhouettes on rooftops. Figures standing still. Watching the repeated sunrise. Dozens of them. Motionless. Their shadows stretched toward our building. She stepped back again, so suddenly that she bumped into me. Her breath hitched, sharp and panicked. They weren't there before. No, I whispered. They weren't. The sun began to dip again. The figures didn't move. Not when the light hit them. Not when the darkness returned. Not when the sky shifted for the fourth time. She grabbed my hand, her fingers cold and trembling. We need to leave. But before we could take a step, the sunlight poured back across the buildings, brighter, too bright, and in that flood of light, the figures turned. Not all the way. Not fully. Just enough for us to know that they had noticed us. Their heads tilted toward our window. Every single one. The fourth sunset fell like a curtain. And now the sky is glowing again. Even as I write this. Even though it should be long past midnight. The sun is rising. And setting. And rising again. Over and over. And the figures on the rooftops, they're getting closer. We haven't slept. We haven't dared to close the blinds. We're afraid of what will happen when the cycle stops, or if it never does. The night never truly comes anymore. The day never truly begins. She looked out the window, and the sun began setting again. And again. And again. And something out there is watching us learn the pattern. It happened on a night so quiet that I remember wondering if silence itself could have weight. Not the soft, peaceful quiet of a late evening, but a hollow, heavy stillness that seemed to press against the glass of my windows. A silence that felt deliberate. Intentional. Like the city had drawn in a breath, and forgotten how to let it go. I didn't notice it at first. I was sitting on my couch, drifting in and out of a light doze, listening to the hum of the radiator and the occasional creak in the walls. When I finally stood up to stretch, something in the air made me pause. I didn't hear anything. No cars. No sirens. No footsteps. No rustling branches. Nothing. It was as if the city itself wasn't really asterisk there. Asterisk. I walked slowly to the window, expecting to see empty streets, maybe a blackout, maybe heavy fog. But the view outside was shockingly clear. The moon hung low over the rooftops, full and pale, bathing everything in a cold silver wash. Buildings stood tall and still. Parked cars lined the street in perfect rows. Streetlights glowed faintly, like softened candle flames. Everything looked normal. Except nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Nothing lived. It felt like opening a storybook and finding myself inside a painting, flat, unmoving, too quiet to be real. My first instinct was to check the time. 2:31 a.m. That meant something should have been happening, a taxi rolling by, a neighbor returning from a night shift, a dog barking in the distance. But the city felt sealed shut around me. I cracked my window open. I braced myself for cold air, the distant buzz of electricity, the sigh of the nighttime breeze. But the moment the window opened, the silence rushed in, like it had been waiting, pooling on the other side of the glass, ready to spill into my apartment. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was the presence of something else. Something vast. Something listening. Something dreaming. I closed the window quickly. My heart thudded in my chest, loud enough that I wondered if anyone, or anything, out there could hear it. I felt watched, though I couldn't have said by whom. Or what. Instead of going back to bed, I stepped into my hallway. The floorboards felt colder than usual, the air heavier. I moved slowly, almost afraid to break the stillness with my steps. When I reached the stairwell, I paused. The building's usual hum was gone. No elevator groaning. No pipes rattling. No muffled conversations from behind doors. It felt like the entire building was suspended in the same breathless moment. I descended to the lobby, my footsteps echoing louder than they should have. Each one sounded sharp and too clear, like I was walking through someone else's memory of a building, not the building itself. The glass lobby doors revealed the same eerily peaceful street. Static. Perfect. Dreamlike. I stepped outside. The moment my foot touched the pavement, the air felt thicker, as though the world changed texture. It wasn't cold, not really, but the atmosphere carried a strange density, like breathing through someone else's lungs. I walked a few steps, listening for anything, even the smallest noise. But the silence was absolute. I realized something then. It didn't feel like the city was waiting for sound. It felt like it had already heard me, long before I ever stepped outside. Like it had already imagined this moment. Already prepared for it. Already dreamed me walking. As if I were moving through a story the city had written overnight. A dream it had already dreamed. And I was simply acting it out. With each step, the sensation grew stronger. The shadows on the buildings didn't shift. The light didn't flicker. Even the moon looked painted on. The city wasn't asterisk empty. Asterisk it was asterisk complete. Asterisk finished. I reached the middle of the street before I noticed the figure. A silhouette standing at the far end of the block. Still. Featureless in the moonlight. Facing me. My breath caught. But when I blinked, the figure didn't move. Didn't sway. Didn't react. It was like a person-shaped cutout placed carefully in the distance. A detail. A background element. Something added to the dream of the city, but not alive within it. I took a step backward. The silence thickened, tightening around me like a slow, heavy tide. And then, barely audible, almost imagined, I heard something. A whisper. Not a voice. Not words. A sound like a page turning. Then another. And another. The figure remained still. I realized with a cold, creeping certainty, the city wasn't silent because it was empty. It was silent because it was dreaming. And I was inside the dream. Being shaped by it. Expected by it. Remembered by it. The city had dreamed me before I ever woke. And now it was simply letting me catch up. The figure at the end of the street slowly lifted its head. Not toward the moon. Not toward the buildings. Toward me. As if recognizing me. As if remembering me. As if I had finally stepped into the place where I'd always belonged, inside a dream the city had already dreamed. I don't go outside at night anymore. Because now, every time the city falls quiet, every time the air turns heavy, every time the shadows freeze, I feel it watching. Not waiting. Remembering. And sometimes, when the silence deepens, I swear I can hear pages turning again, as the city dreams the next part of me before I even live it.